Welcome to my October wrap up, where sadly we are already going to be drawing spooky season to a close. Now, there is still plenty of time in the year, of course, to dabble in a little bit of horror or to read some more atmospheric books, but the month of dedicating myself to the spookiest reads possible has sadly now passed. And also, sadly, I did not read as much as I would like to. I did not finish a single fantasy book in the month, so I read 6 books total, but my page count is very, very small because I only read like thrillers, horror, that kind of vibe, and every single fantasy book I picked up, I DNF'd, unfortunately, which is a funk that I'm hoping I can get myself out of in November. I actually really need to, because I have a book club live show in November. But at the minute, fantasy is not something that I have been pursuing. The good thing about that, though, is that every single book that I read in October was October themed, which is great because I find that with having a lot of required reading on my TBR, I don't always get to devote the season to the seasonal reading. It's the only time that I ever read seasonally as well. So it was really good to kind of like lock in to the vibes. My stats are going to be all over the place. October is not a good representation of how I typically read. There's a lot of audiobooks in here because I wasn't reading fantasy. My ratings all skewed a lot higher because I'm not as critical of other genres as I am of fantasy. And the whole thing was all over the place, but we'll just crack on and get into those statistics. So in the month of October, I read 6 books, which added up to 2,153 pages and broke down to an average of 69 pages per day. For the star ratings, I had just 1 3-star, 4 4-stars, and even 1 5-star read, which broke down to an average of 4 stars per book. For the demographics, all of the books that I read were adult. For the formats, I listened to 4 audiobooks, I read 1 ebook, and I read 1 standardly formatted novel. For the genres, we had 2 horror, 2 mystery, 1 contemporary, and 1 thriller. And finally, for the places where I sourced these books from, 5 of them were from my own TBR that existed prior to the start of 2025, and 1 was a book that I've hauled in 2025. The first book that I picked up in the month was The Book of Cold Cases by Simone St. James. I knew that Simone St. James was quite a popular thriller author, which is one of the reasons why I wanted to check this out. And I really enjoyed this one, actually. I gave it 4 stars, although I did think that it was going to be a straight up thriller, and it does have a little bit of like a paranormal or supernatural element that I think Simone St. James is actually known for. So this one is following a woman who has a blog called The Book of Cold Cases. She is tied to a crime, like a murder that happened when she was a child, of which she was not the victim. So she kind of talks around this a lot throughout the course of the book, but I think it's what really kickstarted her interest in true crime. So she has this blog that she dedicates to cold cases, and she works as a receptionist in a doctor's office. And one day this woman comes in who she knows is somebody who was accused of murdering, I think, like 2 or 3 men in the 70s, I think. Yeah, in 1977. And they didn't have enough proof to convict her, and she kind of like faded off into the background. There is a lot of talk of, I guess, like sexism and stuff in here as well because of the way the murders that she was accused of were sensationalized. But our main character sees her in the reception of this doctor's office that she works in, kind of follows her and asks this woman if she is okay to be interviewed for the main character's blog. Now, this woman has never spoken out about what happened back in the 70s, but she agrees to talk to our main character. And when the main character starts to listen to this story unfolding of what actually happened in the 70s, and she goes to the main character's house to do so, she finds a lot of strange occurrences and like things that aren't quite adding up, and the house itself is a very kind of pervasive presence within this book. So like I said, it does have a touch of the paranormal in here, specifically related to kind of like haunting kind of things. When I go into a thriller, I typically like them to be very logic based, everything to kind of make sense. And probably the reason why I gave this 4 stars and not 5 is because we do have that paranormal element that just exists. Like it doesn't have mundane explanations. There is a paranormal element in this book that adds to the story, which, like I said, I think is something that Simone St. James is known for. If this was a fantasy book and it had that kind of like unexplained element, I would have probably been a lot more critical of it. But because I enjoyed this for being like an interesting, suspenseful novel, I kind of rolled with the fact that it had this paranormal element and just accepted it. Although I definitely would have preferred this book if everything would have like kind of tied up a little bit more nicely, even if we'd have just gone more into the paranormal element in a way that kind of made it a little more grounded in reality. I did listen to the audiobook of this one. I think the first 4 books that I read in the month were all audiobooks, and I would definitely recommend this one. It has a full cast audio. We have the 2 female perspectives. It's told in 2 timelines. So we have the main character's perspective kind of in present day, and then the woman that she's interviewing back in the 70s. And then we also have a male narrator in here, and I can't remember who he is or why we have it. It might be something like police interviews or something like that, very sparingly throughout the book. So if you are an audio listener and you want to give this a try, I would definitely recommend. The next book that I picked up is one that has been on my TBR forever, kind of like top of my TBR, but I always want to prioritize it at this time of year. And then lo and behold, like every year slips past and I never read it, and it's on every autumnal TBR I make. But I finally read the Southern Book Club's Guide to Slaying Vampires by Grady Hendrix. Once again, listen to the audio of this. The narrator for this one is one that I have listened to before. She narrates the Children of Blood and Bone series. She narrates The Hate You Give, and The Hate You Give is actually one of the first audiobooks that I ever listened to, because I am quite picky with audio. There was a time when like I didn't listen to any audiobooks at all because I could not focus on them, and that is probably the first audiobook that I listened to that actually made me capable of consuming a story in audio. So it was really nice to revisit her narration. This one is a horror story. It's actually connected to one of Grady Hendrix's other books that I've read, which I didn't know until I started this one. This is set in the same town as My Best Friend's Exorcism, which is I think it is still my favorite Grady Hendrix books because thematically I love that book. But this one is set in the early 90s in the same town, whereas My Best Friend's Exorcism is set in the 80s. And this one is following a woman. She is a housewife. Her life is a little bit stagnant. She's not super connected to her husband, and she joins this book club. So they originally start off with this book club that's like really pretentious, and they're reading like great American literature, and they're all really bored. So then one of them starts off this side book club where they start reading true crime. This is a lot more fascinating to them, and the really interesting thing about this book is the contradictions between the books that they're reading for the book club and what is happening in real life, because our main character is attacked by this old lady that's like rummaging through her bins, and like the good southern lady that she is, she goes to the house because this woman dies like shortly after. She's an elderly lady. She goes to that woman's house to kind of give her condolences to her nephew, and that is how this man James comes into their life. A lot of strange things start happening around the town at this point, and a lot of children from communities of colour and poorer communities within this town start to be preyed upon, and our main character suspects that it is this nephew of the elderly woman James who is responsible. However, because he is a white man who has integrated himself really well into the community, he starts to work with their families and helps their husbands to make money, because these are like not rich women. They're doing like okay, but they're not well off, I would say. Like they have enough money to survive. They don't need to worry about paying for food, but like anything extra is kind of like things that they have to save for. So this man works with their families, starts to make their families more affluential, and our main character always suspects him of being the person responsible for all of the bad things that are happening in town, but nobody believes her, whether that be her husband or the husbands of the town or her own book club. I was going to say this is a little bit of a more serious horror from Grady Hendrix, but actually all of his books that I've read have underlying messages that reflect society embedded within them. And this one is about how nobody really advocates or believes communities of colour when they're going through hardship, and nobody really cares because it's not their problem. The main characters in here are kind of happy to brush under the rug everything that is happening to the poorer communities of their town because it isn't happening to them. As long as they're doing well and as long as they're safe, they're happy to turn a blind eye to what they maybe suspect is actually going on. And then we also have some discussion in here on things like sexism and the way that women are expected to always defer to their husbands. I mean, this is set in the 90s. I know that this is still for some people like a very normal way of life to kind of defer to your husband and have to kind of like run everything by them and not be allowed to do things unless your husband approves, even though for the most part I like to think that we have higher standards for how we treat women these days, although I definitely know for sure that that is not always the case, and we are also backsliding as a society a little bit. But it does also talk about those household dynamics while still retaining the kind of like campy, over the top Grady Hendrix horror that he is known for. Now I did give this one one 4 stars. I thought that it was a little bit slow in parts, especially because we do follow this like cyclical, repetitive structure of our main character Patricia saying to people like, hey, I think that this is wrong. I think this guy is up to something. And somebody kind of like quashes her beliefs and makes her kind of sit back and stop talking about it. And we go through that cycle over and over again of her trying to alert the community to what is actually going on and nobody really believing her. Still a Grady Hendrix book that I love though. It's still my favorite horror author. Like I've said, I've only really read more than one horror book from Grady Hendrix, but as somebody who is new to horror and isn't really sure exactly what they like, I like Grady Hendrix. It can be a little bit gory for me in parts because I am squeamish, but overall still enjoy everything that I've read from Grady Hendrix. I then picked up The Dry by Jane Harper. This one is a mystery novel, and once again this was an audio read, although I would not recommend that you pick this one up in audio. This one was the book that I enjoyed the least of everything that I read. I still liked it, but I definitely had a lot less interest in it than I did everything else that I read in October. So this one is a mystery novel about a man who is a police officer, but he deals in things like fraud and dodgy investments, and anything that kind of involves money is his like area of speciality within the force. However, he's going back to his hometown, which is like out in the countryside in Australia, because his best friend is dead. So he's going to the funeral, but also the funeral of his best friend's family, because he has actually been accused of killing his wife, killing his child, and then killing himself. So our main character arrives in this small town kind of just to pay his respects, and we find out very quickly that he was actually run out of this town when he was a teenager because of the death of a teenage girl who was friends with him and his best friend, who has now died. So as he goes back to this town, it's very clear, because it's such a small town, that people are still holding grudges. Nobody actually wants him there. A lot of people still blame him for the death of this girl, even though there was no proof to tie anybody specifically to it. And he is kind of fighting against this prejudice while also dealing with the parents of his best friend, who are begging him to look into this because they don't believe that their son was capable of killing his family. Now, in the background of this, there is also a lot of hardship in this town at the minute because they are going through a drought. They are a community of largely like farmers, but the farms aren't profitable because the crops aren't growing because of this drought, and that is putting a lot of pressure on a lot of people, which is thought to be the reason behind like maybe why his best friend did kill his family, because they were struggling so much. But it's also putting a lot of pressure on a lot of other people in the town and making desperate situations a lot more desperate. So this one is more of like a detective novel, which is not something that I typically enjoy. I do definitely prefer like a thriller to a mystery, just like straight off, but I also don't really like things like serialized detective novels. This is a little bit different, I would say, because it's not one of those kind of like long running episodic series, but still the investigative angle of this book and following a detective character was not especially appealing to me, especially because we are following like a man in his late 30s, so his perspective isn't one that I was super like interested in when we were talking kind of like about his personal struggles and how he can't settle down and like get married and he's had these relationships that have failed. That kind of like personal perspective, on top of the fact that it was like an investigative detective novel, didn't really align with like the kind of things that I'm interested in. In terms of the audio of this and why I would not recommend it is because this skips timelines quite frequently and there is nothing to differentiate between the timelines in the text. So when you're listening to an audio and it's kind of like a narrator who reads the book as opposed to performing it, like there is some differentiation between the characters when they're speaking, but in terms of like the general narration style, it doesn't really differ between the people whose perspective is being narrated. So this, it like multiple times in the same chapter, it will have like a paragraph in present day, then a paragraph flashing back to this girl who went missing like when they were teenagers and someone related to that, and then it'll flash back to the present, and you have to like, when you're listening to the audio, have to be paying like a lot of attention to be able to recenter yourself and figure out like kind of whose perspective we're listening to and what timeline we're in. So if you want to pick this one up, would definitely recommend going the physical route on it. I would definitely read more from Jane Harper in the future. This was recommended to me by Win from Literary Diversions because I like books that have very clever plot twists where everything comes together really well and makes a lot of sense, which Jane Harper definitely delivered in this book. I would be more interested in picking up one of Jane Harper's standalone novels that doesn't follow a detective perspective, but if I were to enjoy them, then I wouldn't necessarily be opposed to coming back and continuing on this series, which continues to follow this same guy, although I'm pretty sure that the rest of the things that he investigates aren't as personally tied to him as the mystery that we're solving in this one is. But yeah, it was like good, but definitely aligns more with certain things about like the mystery genre that I don't enjoy, like detective novels, and it kind of leans a little bit into the crime genre in that regard, which is not one that I'm particularly interested in. I then picked up Yellowface by RF Kuang, which this is the one that I've put down as contemporary fiction because I wasn't really sure where it fell. It has a lot of different elements in here. Once again, I listened to the audio of this and I would definitely recommend, because while it's not one that I think you necessarily need to listen to in audio, the indignation in the narrator's voice throughout the entirety of this book I think really lent into her character and the kind of like underlying themes of this book. So this one is a satirical contemporary novel that has some thriller elements and also pokes fun at the publishing industry, which was actually really quite funny. But this one is following a woman called June who went to university with somebody called Athena. Now since then, June has published her debut novel and it flopped. Like, it did not do well. But Athena is jumping from success to success. Athena like has just signed over the rights of her book for like a Netflix deal, and those two are hanging out. They're not like close friends, but they do catch up pretty frequently, and they're hanging out. They go get drunk. They actually really bond during this evening, and then they go to make pancakes and Athena chokes to death. So earlier that evening they were discussing Athena's next book, and she is somebody who is very secretive until a book is complete. She doesn't let anybody know what it's about. She doesn't let anybody read her notes, her drafts. Like, nobody knows anything about the project she's currently working on until it is finished. And so earlier in the evening, Athena told June that her book was finished, and June read the first few pages, thought it was excellent, mind-blowing, amazing. So when Athena dies and June realizes that nobody knows about this manuscript, she takes it for herself, she heavily edits it, and then she publishes it, and it becomes the most successful book that she's definitely ever written, and she gets a taste of the success that Athena must have experienced. Now at first, because we're in her head the entire way through this, like, she has convinced herself that she's doing a good thing. Like, it would be horrible if like Athena's book was never published. It would be terrible if nobody ever got to find out like how amazing this book was. And so she takes it and edits it to kind of finish it off and polish it for Athena, and then just publishes it under her own name. But throughout the entirety of this book, even though she does know that she's done something wrong, she continuously convinces herself that she's in the right. Like, she edited this book so extensively that she practically wrote it. It's now hers. A big topic of this book is also race, because the book that Athena was writing was about Chinese soldiers in World War I. Athena is a woman of color, she's Asian, but June is a white woman with an ambiguous name because her full name is Juniper Song Haywood, but the publishing house decide to publish her book as Juniper Song because it sounds kind of like ambiguously Asian, as well as the fact that she's like stolen her manuscript from her friend. That is wrong to start off with. We also have these discussions of colonialism and cultural appropriation and diversity politics within publishing as June continues to step into spaces where she's advocating for people of color, like as a white woman, and going into like Asian communities that were deeply impacted by this book because like their family members were these like Chinese soldiers in World War I. And unless she's directly asked about it, like she never says that she is Asian, she never lies about it, but she allows people to believe that she is, like going off this ambiguous name to help her to climb the ladder. But as this book goes on, like her paranoia and all of these lies that she's wrapped in really start to play with her psyche, and she becomes more and more like deranged through this novel. So I really enjoyed June's perspective. Actually, she's obviously not a very likable character, and at first, I think, when I say at first, I mean like in the first chapter, like you do sympathize with her because it's hard to be in an industry with people who are potentially like doing better than you, and it doesn't matter what industry it is. Like when you have friends who are very successful and maybe like it's not your season right now and everyone's doing a little bit better than you, I sympathize with her, like being in the same industry as somebody who's like very successful when she isn't doing very well herself. But then at every opportunity she just does the wrong thing, and this starts to escalate and escalate and escalate until it ends very badly for everyone everybody involved. So yeah, I did enjoy this one. This is now 2 out of 3 RF Kuang books that I've liked, so I guess RF Kuang is an author that I enjoy, because previously I hadn't enjoyed The Poppy War, I had enjoyed Babel, and this I guess is the tiebreaker. I do also have Catabasis that I want to pick up at some point. Because this is a contemporary fiction, I knew that it wasn't one that I was particularly going to be keeping on my shelves. It's very entertaining, it's a very fast consuming read, but it's not one that's like going to stick with me for a long time. I did give it 4 stars though, and I think especially if you're looking for like an entertaining audiobook that does move really quickly, I would definitely recommend it for that. My 5-star read of the month came as a surprise to everybody, including myself. This is like a 4.5, and it's Killers of Certain Age by Deanna Raybourn. So I thought that this was going to be like a silly, goofy mystery novel with like pensioners fighting crime, and I mean it kind of is that, but it also has like a lot more to it that I wasn't expecting. This one is following 4 female assassins who were in their prime in the 70s, and we do have 2 timelines in here. We have the present day timeline, and we do also keep flashing back to the 70s when they were being trained as assassins, when they were in their prime, and like some of the antics they got up to in their youth. But in present day, they have now retired from this agency that they work for. They've been sent the letter saying like, hey guys, we don't need you anymore. Here's this complimentary cruise to thank you for all your years of service, as well as a generous retirement package. So we start this novel off where they are going on this cruise, and a little bit of the way into it, one of them sees somebody that they know works for the agency that they've now retired from on the boat, and they're like, well shit, like if he's here to kill someone, and that's bad news for us because it means that either we're the targets or we're collateral damage, and this agency that we've sacrificed a lot for, that we've dedicated our lives to, doesn't even find us valuable enough to make sure that we're not collateral damage in this potential hit. So they very quickly find out that they are indeed the targets of this hit, and from then they are on the run as this agency corporation that they worked for sends all of these assassins out to try and eliminate them, but they have no idea why. They have no idea what they have done that could be so bad that this organization would turn on them, because they actually started out trying to do a good thing. Like that's why the organization was formed. It was set up after World War II to hunt down the rest of the Nazis that got away after the end of the war, and they have continued from there, kind of eliminating bad people who do bad things, like kind of for the good of society. So it's like this almost vigilante assassin agency as they pick off all of the people who are kind of too powerful to be taken down by the law. So I expected this to be, like I said, like a pretty fun romp, like silly, goofy, like, oh, old people like fighting, but it actually isn't that at all. It's more about how essentially you do still have life after 60. Like when you're retired, you're not completely put out to pasture. Like these are very powerful, strong women who have been like physically powerful, physically strong, but also mentally, and also have gained a lot of skills over their years as assassins, and that doesn't completely disappear. Like they have some aches and pains that they didn't have when they were in their 20s, but they can still pull off some moves, and they also have wisdom behind them, which helps them to outsmart a bunch of people who are coming after them in this book. But then this, because of the age of the characters, this is also kind of a story about loss and resilience. As we flick back to the past timeline, we see kind of like how they were in their prime versus how they are now, and like the people that they've lost along the way, the things that they've lost along the way, because like I said, they're still very skilled, very able ladies, but not as skilled and as able in some regards as they were when they were in their youth, and that is also like a great loss. But then we also have like the element of sisterhood in here, how having worked together for like 40 years has really bonded these women, especially as they've lived kind of a life of sacrifice because they work for this top secret organization. It has limited their ability to have normal relationships and to live normal lives, and so they're even closer because of that, because this is something that they can share in a way that they can't share it with the majority of people in their lives. As well as that though, it was just like a really fun, compelling story. It reminded me of the movie, was it Red that I said that it was? That was kind of like, as soon as I started reading this, like Helen Mirren was definitely in my mind. I haven't seen Red because typically like that's not my kind of movie, and honestly this isn't my kind of story, but I feel like the combination of this like fun, kind of fast-paced, high-stakes plot with the extra like depth and meaning that we had in here made this a hit for me, and I would definitely recommend it if it sounds interesting to you. I was completely taken aback by how much I loved this, but I really did think it was great. And then the final book that I read in October, I gave 4 stars to. I did really enjoy it. I don't think I enjoyed it to the degree that I expected to though, unfortunately, and that is the Hacienda by Isabel Canas. So this was still a 4-star read for me, but I think through reading this book, I've discovered that haunted houses aren't my thing. Like, it's not enough to turn me off a book if I'm interested in it. Like, it does have a haunted house, but haunted houses aren't going to be a buzzword for me and a theme that has me like reaching for a book. So this one is a gothic horror set in Mexico in the 1800s. This is set in a very pivotal time period for Mexico. It's set just after the War of Mexican Independence, I think it says. Yeah, Mexico's War of Independence, and that is not something that I know a lot about, but I do know that it is very integral to the character's kind of like motivations and the situation that she ends up in this book, because it has a lot to do with like her father and his political allegiances and what happened to him because of the war, and also like the man that she marries. But this is following a woman whose father dies, he's murdered, and herself and her mother have to go live with her aunt. Her aunt is horrible to her. Colorism is like a big central theme of this novel as well, which once again I think ties into this specific time period in Mexico. And so she finds herself a husband who is influential, who's rich, so that she can be the lady of a household and have some level of freedom that she isn't having in her aunt's house, where her aunt is constantly like putting her below her own daughters and treating her like a servant. So she marries this man, and she knows that he's been married before, but she doesn't know a lot about his first wife. And when she goes to this house, she finds that there is a malevolent presence within the house. So she then tries to get to the bottom of this malevolent presence and tries to exorcise it from the house with the help of a priest. But the servants of the house and the people who live there, including her husband's sister, are not being especially forthcoming when she's trying to accomplish this. They're not giving her any information about the history of this house, what's happened in it. They won't tell her about her husband's first wife, and they're not especially friendly to the priest that she invites into their home. Now, this is a gothic story, so my favorite thing about this was actually the prose and the atmosphere. It definitely felt like a gothic novel. This has been compared to both Rebecca and Mexican Gothic. I love Rebecca. It's one of my favorite books. Mexican Gothic, not so much, but I would also compare this to The Haunting of Hill House, which once again didn't enjoy, but also it reminded me of Maria's perspective specifically in Bury Our Bones of the Midnight Soil as well, because this is once again a woman who's come from a very restrictive household and specifically sought out a more powerful man to try and gain like a level of freedom. And when she arrives in her new household, she realizes that everything is not shaped up to be the way that she thought it was going to. I do definitely see the Rebecca comparisons in here. I would say that this differs from Rebecca because it kind of leans into all of the things that you think are going on when you read Rebecca, but Rebecca plays out in like a slightly different way, whereas this kind of leans into the sinister elements of like this elusive man that lives in this house or owns this house but is never really present, and what happened to like kind of the wife that lived there before. This is also a book that is largely about colonialism, and colonialism really forms a big part of the horror elements throughout this book, blended with classic haunted house horror elements like in The Haunting of Hill House. Now, the thing that I didn't like about The Haunting of Hill House is that it starts to, like, as the book goes on, the writing gets more and more frenzied. It's more run-on sentences, there's less punctuation to create this like dreamlike, ethereal, like what is real and what is not atmosphere, which I don't particularly enjoy. And the Hacienda also did employ some of those tactics, not to the same degree as The Haunting of Hill House, but we do definitely see The Haunting of Hill House influence in here in the way that the haunting of the Hacienda is like manifesting itself and the way that it's presenting in things like hallucinations, and like there'll be blood dripping down the walls one second and then the next it's gone. In terms of kind of The Haunting of Hill House, if we talk about the TV show, which I also really love but is very different from the book, this reminded me a lot of The Haunting of Bly Manor, which is a TV show in the same kind of wheelhouse as Hill House, and I really enjoyed it for that. There is a romantic element in here between our main character and the priest. I really liked his perspective in terms of the kind of level of longing that we had in his narrative. This is obviously a forbidden romance because he is a priest and she is also married, so it's not anything that kind of like develops into anything salacious, but there's a lot of longing and pining there, which is really brought forward within the writing, which I enjoyed. In terms of the romance though, like I didn't really care that much about it because I was in here for like the horror elements, but I feel in terms of this being a gothic novel, the language, the themes of like longing and pining and the atmosphere really solidified this within that genre. I think it's just the fact that this was a haunted house story, which is why I didn't love it. But like I said, I still really enjoyed it and I gave it 4 stars overall. Just a little sneak peek, I guess. I did start The Very Secret Society of Irregular Witches. I wanted to finish this before the end of the month, but didn't get around to it. This one was my Halloween read. I decided to go like stray away from the horror and go into something a little bit like cozy, but with Halloween vibes. And I only made it halfway through before the end of the month. This one so far is like, it's fine. I'm not loving it, but it's okay. And you'll get my full thoughts either in the next episode of Shelve It or Scrap It or my November wrap up. Those are all of the books that I read in October. Not very many, but I am, like I said, glad that I lent into the theme of the season because I don't get to do that very often. So to have, especially like a month without fantasy, I'm not sure if that has literally ever happened in the history of my channel where I haven't read a single fantasy book. The closest we got was like the horror, but like that's very much not fantasy, that's very much horror. So down in the comments, let me know if you've read any of these, what you thought of them. Also, let me know what your favorite spooky read was. It can be like spooky cute like this or like genuinely scary, but let me know what your favorite book of the season you read was. And if you would like to let me know you were here but you don't feel like you have anything to say, please leave me a house emoji for the Hacienda. But aside from that, guys, please don't forget to like this video if you liked it and subscribe if you wanna. If you head to my description box, you'll find links to my Goodreads, my Instagram and my Patreon if you want to follow me on any of those. But that's it from me today, guys. Bye.
Oh, you bite your friend like chocolate. You say you're real go where nobody knows, with guns hidden under our petticoats. We're never gonna quit it, no, we're never gonna quit it, no.